most foreigners we met in Rwanda would have the perspective of like, oh, this is how I do it in Canada or the United States, and this is how they do it in Rwanda. It's kind of this like bipolar way of looking at doing things. But then we'd spend time in like India or in wherever, and we're like, okay, well, in Canada, yeah, we definitely do it that way. Rwanda, they're doing it this way, which is kind of a blend of maybe European colonialism and African traditional things of, however they do things, even if we're talking about plumbing and whatever. But then we're also like, well, we were in India, and in India, they're doing it this completely different way over here. So it was kind of neat where we had a bit, I don't know if it's a little bit more perspective of just like, the world's a big place, and, it doesn't have to be this way or that. It could be like 10 different ways of doing things, or more. So it's interesting to kind of just keep that open mind a little bit of like, people do things and figure things out in so many different ways.
That's Craig Fehr, and this is The Stories That Brought You Here, a podcast dedicated to learning about some of the people living in and around the Salish Sea. I'm your host, Chris Wakaluk. When Craig and his wife Ruthie were in their late 20s, they decided to make a big change in their lives. In 2008, they sold their home in Alberta, packed their bags, and headed out for a year-long trip around the world. One of the reasons for the trip was to put their skills to use and engage in volunteer opportunities in various countries, including Papua New Guinea and Cambodia. This journey would eventually lead them to Rwanda in Africa. While there, they experienced a resonance with the country, and after completing their year-long trip, they returned home to Alberta with a plan to go back. They would wind up living in Rwanda for the next 6.5 years. Craig, a plumber by trade, will describe many of the incredible experiences they had during their time there, which included creating some employment opportunities for those in need, and also to help create better plumbing in the country. This is an incredibly interesting interview which chronicles the experience of two Canadians living abroad in a very different country, and is a highly informative and educational look into Rwanda. That's coming up in a few minutes, but before we get started, have you ever considered documenting your own or a family member's life story? Well, since 2019, I've been working with people privately to document the important stories of their lives to preserve for current and future family members to enjoy. These recordings are all in your own voice, and it is the story of your life fully told. The creation of an audio memoir is beyond simply preserving words. This is a chance to be truly witnessed as I assist you in telling your life story. A very unique opportunity awaits to honor your journey, celebrate your life, and create something deeply important for yourself and loved ones. How it works is we start with the pre-interviews. Those are a few casual conversations so I can learn more about you and your stories. Next come the recordings that take place in the comfort of your own home. I'll spend the time guiding you through the process of sharing the key moments of your life journey. All that is required is a quiet room and your stories. Using creative audio editing techniques, my voice is removed from the final recording, and I bring out the best of you by crafting your storytelling into a polished audio memoir. Recording an audio memoir can be a really powerful and important experience, and I just want to share my latest testimonial with you. Quote, "Thank you from the bottom of my heart all the way to the top. This process of creating an audio memoir with you has been ever so meaningful, especially at this ending time of my life." End quote. While these recordings are incredibly important to preserve your life story for your family members to have, I think an even more important aspect of this whole process, it's an opportunity for a person to deeply reflect on their life and have myself, an attentive listener, be present with compassionate curiosity and bear witness to someone telling their life story. If you'd like to know more about this, you can go to my website, myaudiomemoir.com, and you'll find all the information there. You can reach out to me via the website as well, too, if you have any questions for me about this. And I would love to tell you more and possibly help you turn your stories into a legacy. myaudiomemoir.com. Now, here's my interview with Craig Fehr.
So we were living in Edmonton, And then for probably a year prior, so probably 2007, the idea kind of came to us like, hey, you know what? We could do, I don't know, more. We could do something different. I think we had a few friends who had done some traveling, like long-term travel. We had one friend who did 2 years of long-term travel with not a big, clear agenda of what he was doing. And then I kind of had the idea. I was like, well, you know what? I would like to do an open-ended trip as well, maybe up to 2 years. But I'd also like to have a little bit more purpose, just to like, let's have a little bit of purpose in what we do, knowing, I think we know this in Canada, that we're really privileged where, you know, you look at all the statistics, Canadians are in the upper 10% of the world of income, and especially as middle class. The middle class in Canada is probably, you know, among the wealthiest middle class of any of these countries in the world. And then to be like, well, what can we do to make a difference in the world? I was a plumber already at that time, and Ruthie was a LPN, a nurse. And we're like, you know what? We have some practical skills, and let's maybe join with a few organizations. And that was part of our trip, was like, hey, maybe we're going to want to go work somewhere and help XYZ group in whatever country. But looking at a website or looking at a flyer of like, hey, you should go to Nepal and help this people group. And you're like, how do you know unless you go and like see? So that was kind of like the whole purpose of the trip, was like, we love to travel. Traveling's great. But like, let's go and do some practical work. And so in front of our trip, we did about a year of planning. And we kind of were taking, say, 4 to 8 week slots of like, hey, we're going to be in this country for 4 to 8 weeks. And then we're going to go to that country for 4 to 8 weeks. And then we kind of laid it out in a way that we're like, okay, we're going to go to some place where we don't really have anything planned. So we started out on our trip. We left 2008 in Edmonton. We sold our house. I closed my business. Ruthie quit her job and sold most of our possessions. And we're like, you know what? We're just going to go. And we might end up back in Edmonton. Who knows? There was something really powerful about not even having that house to like worry about. We had nothing to worry about in Canada. And so we're like, or I guess my dog was the only thing. I had a basset hound that
You left a dog behind.
We left a dog behind. I had a 2-year-old basset hound who was like my best buddy in the plumbing van. And unfortunately we never found a great place, but he ended up in some really rich families. We joked he's probably sleeping on a $10,000 couch somewhere. some family without kids and whatever. I'm sure it turned out great for him. But we're like, oh, but we never got him back even after we came back and everything. But that was about it. Other than that, we were really like just completely open to be like, hey, let's go, and we don't have to like think back about what our lives are in Canada, and we can just be open to discover whatever. So we left with each just a backpack.
How old are you two at this point?
28, 29. So 2008, just prior to the wonderful 2008 financial crash. So, we left in June. So June 2008, kind of with just like open itinerary. We bought airplane tickets for the next 6 months. It took us, I think that was like 14 countries ahead. And stop one was Fiji, which was essentially just like, let's get away from Canada. Let's kind of refocus our brains. And I had a Fijian friend who lived in my hometown up in northern Alberta. And he's like, oh, if you're going to go to Fiji, then I'll hook you up. Like all my family, I got friends, they'll take care of you. And so we just went and even had a few adventures in Fiji. I can tell you one fun story was he's like, well, my village where my family is from, like they now live in the city, but where they're from, it's this little island that you got to take a tiny little 20-foot open boat to get there. And it's about a 2-hour boat ride in the open seas. His parents were hosting us and just doing an amazing job looking after us. And they're like, well, there's been a big storm that, had come through. and it was a tropical storm or something. So like, okay, we're going to wait. We're going to wait. Finally, they're like, okay, we think it's clearing up Monday. We should be fine to go on Monday. And so then we go down to the docks, and you're basically on a public boat. Whoever wants to buy a ticket on this boat, and there's probably room for about, 6 to 8 people. It's just a regular small open boat. And they load it completely up because the village has nothing except what comes on this boat. So there's like flour and rice and whatever they're taking to the village for like basic necessities, whatever they don't grow there. And so by the time they loaded everything up, this boat is barely above the water. Like we're like talking a few inches. And we're like, okay, well, it's nice and calm here in the harbor. Like this should be fine. And then after about a half an hour, we get out of the kind of like the inlet in the harbor, and it was like the open seas. We're in 20-foot waves, and our boat is like 20, 25 feet long. Like it was, and we're literally looking up at these 20-foot waves. And luckily they weren't like crashing on us or anything. Just these big, huge rollers were just bouncing up and down. And the Fijians were white knuckling it. So if the Fijians are white knuckling it, then you're like, oh, okay, this is crazy. Like this is crazy for them even. And there was the captain. He had like his helper. That guy was bailing water with a bucket the entire trip, just bailing water. People are sitting in the back. They just started bailing water the entire time. And it was probably for about an hour of our time was just in these like crazy waves, and he's like trying to avoid the big waves and shutting the engine down to like, navigate the waves. And then eventually we got there completely fine, completely soaked to the bone. But it's, it's Fiji, it's tropical weather. And so we get there, and then we go to this village. It was just amazing. Just, in the middle of this tiny little island in the middle of the ocean, essentially. And they just treated us like royalty. Like the chiefs, we slept at his parents', ancestral home, where they still have their home in the village. But every meal we ate was at the chief's house, at like the spot of privilege. And luckily there was a few other Fijians that happened to be visiting. And I think he lived in like Dubai or somewhere, and he was just coming back for a visit. And he's like, just so you know, like, when you get a fish, the privileged part of the fish is like the head. So they're going to give you the head of the fish, and that's like, the choice piece of the fish. And there's a little like meat in like the cheekbones and stuff. But he's kind of like, I can take it I can do the eyeball for you if you want, if you don't want to eat the eyeball. But yeah, so it's just amazing hospitality. And then so we ended up staying in Fiji probably, I think 6 weeks. So after our 6 weeks in Fiji, we were kind of just like, I don't know, just amazed at the world, because I'm like, I didn't particularly know that much about Fiji before we went. We were just kind of like, hey, we're just open for, let's see what there is. Let's figure it out in the moment.
So at this point in Fiji, are you doing any volunteer work, or are you just sort of getting your feet wet with traveling the world and sort of enjoying yourself?
Yeah, no volunteer work, more just like, hey, we have these, family contacts of this guy, that's Fijian guy that's living in Canada. Yeah, like we just didn't feel the rush to be like, oh, we got to go out and save the world, which, I kind of joke a lot about that term, even though maybe I shouldn't or not, because there is some people out there, quote unquote, saving the world or whatever.
Thank goodness for those people.
Yeah, thank goodness. But so we're like, no, we're just going to enjoy Fiji. We're just going to see what the world has for us. And yeah, so we spent 6 weeks there. Then we went to Australia for, I'm thinking it was about 3-4 weeks. We went and got dive certified and dived on the Great Barrier Reef and did all that fun stuff, did some camping. And then after Australia, we actually went and did our first like kind of volunteer stint, and we went to Papua New Guinea. And it was like super far in the middle of, like, if you try to find the exact dot in the middle of the island, the main island, that's where we were. You had to fly in, and it was like the true jungle. It was crazy. And there was this like jungle mission hospital that was, I think out there they got, if I remember right, it was 12 meters of rain a year. Like, so on average, that's like a meter of rain per month. But of course, there's dry season and wet season. And so it was just, when it rained, it was just unbelievable how much like the river would go up and down by like 6 feet or 8 feet.
Wow.
And yeah, so they were just looking, they were looking for like long-term people, like, hey, who can come and work in this hospital? And Ruthie was a nurse, and they actually really needed a lot of maintenance stuff. And it was like, as a plumber, so there was tons of plumbing stuff. Being so close to Australia, it was all based on kind of the Australian plumbing system, which is quite different, where, you know, you're not really dealing with freezing, and pipe sizing and everything was a little different, but generally the same. But then, yeah, the thing I can remember is we stayed in this little house, and it was like the termites were just like, you couldn't stop them. Like, it was just so, all the houses were built on stilts, on steel, metal stilts, because the termites would just eat everything, all the wood. And it just,
wow.
Yeah. The electricity was really like hit or miss. And I think that a generator but like trying to keep things cool. Like, so if you don't, you know, have a refrigerator that's always cold, and it was just this, like, they had all these strategies of how to deal with this, which was amazing. And so like the main family that was there, they were Australian, and I think they were both doctors, if I remember correctly, and they were trying to run this. And then there was an airstrip, so all these like planes would go out and bring in sick people from the middle of, like, we thought it was the middle of nowhere, but that was actually like kind of this, you know, station. And then they would bring people out that otherwise they would have to walk for 5 days to get to the hospital or something, you know.
Oh my gosh.
And so they would pick these people up, or like dugout canoes. And so, yeah, with the one weekend, or it was probably a weekend, they're like, hey, do you guys want to go up the river, go to some local village and go stay for a few nights? And they're like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's go. And because like, we're going to go to this like health station. And so we went up and stayed in these like pretty basic facilities. And then the crazy thing there was there's just wild boar everywhere, and it was quite the hazard. So even when we were there, some guy got mauled by this wild pig, and it was like just vicious. Like, he was like almost dead. But then they would like eventually find that thing and kill it. And then the whole village had meat.
Let's have a feast.
And they were literally like, do you want to have some of this like wild boar? And we're like, yeah. And they were almost like shocked. They're like, oh, you like Westerners are gonna eat this? Or like, you know, I don't know what their thoughts were on us as Westerners, but it's obviously, you know, you have some presumptions of like, oh, they're like upper class, they got to eat their specific white person food. And
yeah, were you offered the eyeball of the wild boar?
No, unfortunately not.
Would you have eaten the eyeball if you were offered?
Probably. Maybe now. I don't know if I would have then. Yeah, the interesting thing is I think as a kid, I was, you know, this super picky eater. And then as I like got older and through high school, or probably even my 20s, kind of like, you know, starting to get over some of this stuff. And then when you go on a trip like this, you're like, this is incredibly insulting for these people if you refuse whatever food they're offering you. So you just like, I'm just going to eat whatever. I'm like, you guys are eating it? All right, well, we're going to eat it too, you know? And so the whole trip really got me over, you know, I'm sure I got a little bit better than when I was little and in my 20s, but that trip really was like, all right, we're just going to eat whatever. And I can.
It's a great attitude to have, right? Because like it's the right attitude for sure. But in the moment, it's hard to do, I would think. I think you're like second guessing yourself like, that looks gross. I don't know if I want to put that in my mouth.
Well, and we would see it in other like, so there's times on our trip and in that whole trip where we would run into people who were just on this, they just coming for a week or 2 weeks and had a very different mindset of like, and they're just like, oh no, gross. And then you could just see like subtly that, just the locals hearing that of like, oh, our food is gross to you. You have to have your Western food or your, you know, and everywhere we went, and you always will have, you know, people where you can like, oh, where can we get this food and that food? But it's also a strange balance because you also maybe miss the comforts of home and the food you grew up with. You know, like British people that live in Canada, they're trying to get their British foods and everything. Got to go to the special British grocery store. Or even like, you know, Africans, they're like, oh, where's the African supermarket? We need to find, you know, the different foods that we want to eat, like plantains, and we want cassava. And for them, that's like, says it's, you know, their home because they're eating the food they grew up with, right? So as part of that is being human. And it's like you grew up with certain food. you can kind of see there's probably a long history of us, looking down upon, white Westerners looking down upon the natives or whatever and their practices and their food and to kind of be like, you know what, these are people. And that's one thing we found wherever we went. It was just like, people are people. And it was like amazing how much, even now I have to think like, okay, if you go travel, like pick a random country and you're going to go travel there. The first question anybody will ask you, is it safe there? That's the very first question. Just because we have this like, I don't know if it's ingrained media, we have all the like negative news stories of a lot of these places when most of the time, 95% of the time, most people are just ordinary people. They're just like welcoming. The hospitality we experienced like on our trip. So we ended up going to 16 countries on that trip. And we were amazed. And we went to some like even really Muslim countries where, especially post, 9/11, there's all like, oh, what are we going to do with, like there's no way you can be safe. They want to target Westerners. And we found the most hospitality in a lot of those places where you're just like, these people will do anything for you. They'll protect you if they think you're at risk or something else. And sure, there is definitely risks involved. But one thing we found often, or I found, is it's often like the really touristy areas. So maybe you feel like you're targeted because you go to we went to the Taj Mahal when we were in India. And the Taj Mahal is just like, it's one of those places you also can't miss if you're in India. It's where probably the pickpockets are. It's all the scam artists. Because they're all like, hey, all the tourists are coming here. Mm-hmm. But if you go to that like scam artist's hometown, wherever in the middle of nowhere, India, like you're probably going to go there and you're like, oh, this is fine. Like they're just going to be super hospitable and they'll just take you in and look after you. And yeah, it's amazing around the world how much people will just like care for tourists and how it's like our suspicion is kind of the problem sometimes where we're like, okay, no, I don't want to trust what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
And you do have to be smart at the same time.
Totally.
Yeah.
But what I'm picking up on is that you're saying that you and Ruthie had a bit of an intentionality about how you were going to conduct yourself in terms of eating the food that was offered to you and being respectful and also wanting to contribute in some of those countries that you went to. And you had a little bit of a different mindset. Do you think that different mindset put you guys in different situations than you would have found otherwise if you were just the average tourist who was just going for a short period of time?
Yeah, and I think we found it too. So our trip, so we went from, Fiji, we didn't have a lot planned, Australia, we're just being tourists essentially. So then after we left Papua New Guinea, we went up through Singapore and then we went to Thailand and then also so we kind of alternated between like, hey, we're going to volunteer with this group in this country. And then now we're kind of open-ended. And so a place like Thailand has got, it's a great place to travel to, but it's like you're a tourist in Thailand. Like you can't, you're not really going to fit in as a local, especially not in like a month or in a week. Maybe if you've lived there a few years and you learn the language and the customs and everything. And and also Thailand, there's so many tourists that go there. They know tourists and they know how to deal with you as a tourist. So it's just kind of like, but it's more like in other places that's kind of like off the beaten track where they don't get a lot of Westerners, they don't get a lot of tourists. And then it's also like, like our thoughts of what we think of some of these countries, like, oh, could you go to Myanmar or somewhere? Or could you go to Bangladesh? And like, we haven't been to those countries. But you're like, oh, is it safe? What are the locals like? Or like, but then, yeah, like I say, 90% of the time, it's just like, oh, warm, welcoming. How can we help you? How can we like promote our country? How can we treat you well? And we were just blown away by how many people would like help us along the way. Yeah. So our trip, it ended up turning into a 1-year trip. We were somewhat open-ended for 2 years. Was the rough plan. We had flights booked for like 6 months. And so we went to Singapore to Thailand. We spent a bit of time in Cambodia where we rented a motorbike. We had met some lady who runs an orphanage in Cambodia. And when we got there, I think we emailed her Say, hey, we're here in Cambodia. Can we come out for a visit? And she's like, oh, sure. Like she basically gave us her address, gave us her phone number. And we didn't actually have a phone. Like this is kind of very early days of smartphones. So we had a laptop along. We'd find internet cafes or internet in your hotels or whatever. And she's like, oh, okay, I'm here and here. And she kind of assumed that we were just going to like hire a taxi and like give the taxi driver directions and get us out there. Instead, we rented a motorbike.
Awesome.
And we're like, hey, we're just going to, like, and we were in the capital city of Phnom Penh. And we're like, we can probably find it. And we did, miraculously, because half the road signs were not in English. They're just in local script. And you're just like, oh, these are not even like characters that we can recognize, but her directions were good, and we ended up and we just like drive in with this little like moped scooter, and she's like, oh, welcome. So we ended up staying. I think we stayed an entire day, just like a visit, and then afterwards, she's like, it was like getting dark, and then she was also like, are these guys gonna make it home? She's like, some of these roads are not safe or whatever, and so she like, got somebody to take us out to the main highway, and then she's like, okay, once you're on the main highway, drive this thing, back into the main city. And I have no idea how we got back to our, hostel or hotel or where we were staying, but we made it back. So all is well. We literally had paper maps and stuff like that. It was pretty entertaining.
So by the end of this year-long trip, you guys are discovering along the way that people are people, that people are nice, they're helpful, they're kind, they'll protect you in some situations, possibly. And so like you're finding this like reaffirming faith in humanity.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And then what else are you guys thinking at this time by the end of the trip?
Well, I think you start looking at your own, culture in a different way, where almost you're like, when you're removed from Canada, Western culture, you can also kind of start critiquing it a little bit too. And you're like, oh. And then sometimes, like, so the end of this trip, the spoiler alert of the end of the trip is we end up going to Rwanda and living in Rwanda for 7 years. But then all of a sudden, when we were in Rwanda, we had this perspective of like, most foreigners we met in Rwanda would have the perspective of like, oh, this is how I do it in Canada or the United States, and this is how they do it in Rwanda. It's kind of this like bipolar way of looking at doing things. But then we'd spend time in like India or in wherever, and we're like, okay, well, in Canada, yeah, we definitely do it that way. Rwanda, they're doing it this way, which is kind of a blend of maybe European colonialism and African, traditional things of, however they do things, even if we're talking about plumbing and whatever. But then we're also like, well, we were in India, and in India, they're doing it this completely different way over here. So it was kind of neat where we had a bit, I don't know if it's a little bit more perspective of just like, the world's a big place, and, it doesn't have to be this way or that. It could be like 10 different ways of doing things, or more. So it's interesting to kind of just keep that open mind a little bit of like, people do things and figure things out in so many different ways.
Dude, that's such a huge learning lesson along the way. That's really amazing.
Yeah, and it's also like you also realize like, oh, what are the resources in this country? So they do it that way because they have these different resources or these different things to help get things done. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense, And then maybe you can also be like, well, in Canada, we kind of do it like this and this. And then so some things you're like, you really appreciate the way we do things in Canada. Like some things that we really appreciate is in a lot of places where we went, you'd see an ambulance and it would be stuck in traffic. Lights are on. There's probably somebody in the back needing to get to the hospital. Nobody's getting out of the way for that ambulance. And yeah, it's crazy.
That's wild.
So, and then you come back to Canada and you're like, you see an ambulance. The car's clear out of the way. Ambulance zips through an intersection, a red light. That's one thing that we're still like grateful for when we come back to it. We're like, whoa, this is a really cool thing that we do in Canada. And it's really sometimes frustrating when you're living in another place as well, where you're like, there could be somebody dying in the back there. And sure, maybe you have something important that you need to do as well. But, if we all just move out of the way a little bit, we could. So there's definitely things we also appreciate about Canada, things like that. So it kind of went a lot of different ways, Yeah, and so as our trip kind of progressed, we went to Thailand, we went to northern India, actually up in Kashmir. We actually went to Pakistan, which was probably less stable then than it is now, and that's a really long story. Everything that happened and went wrong in our 1 year trip essentially went wrong in Pakistan over a week over Christmas in like Christmas 2008.
It's nice that it could just be all concentrated in
Yeah,
one
it was just
spot.
all concentrated
and
at
then it's
once.
terrible that
It was
be
terrible. I
concentrated,
think passport
Yeah.
stolen, couldn't get money, and car accident, and blah blah blah. And then at the end of the day, we actually turned out fine. So that's another story. And eventually, we ended up in Rwanda. And if you pronounce Rwanda, is how we would say it in Canada. The better way is Rwanda, because it's actually RW. It's not RAW. But for the purpose of being Canadian, you could say Rwanda or Rwanda. And which you can edit that part out.
No, that's a good part.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And then Rwandans will actually say it differently as well.
How would they say it?
Well, it's almost like a GR. I don't even want to try because it's like you need to speak like their language is Kinyarwanda. And we lived there and we took lessons and we did about 2 years of lessons. I learned enough to, first of all, my skill set is not language learning. Ruthie was always, when we'd get to a new country, one of our things, I do the directions. How are we going to get there? Ruthie would get basic language. And that was kind of like how we worked as a team.
It's good teamwork. Teamwork.
And then sometimes that went wrong. So like I learned enough Kinyarwanda and I got into like the classes of nouns. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, if you said like 4 potatoes, the word for changes to depending on what you're talking about. And so the prefix would change. So for is kane, that's the word for 4, but it could be bane, it could be chane. And you're just like, oh, okay, this is like beyond me. So I would know like root words and stuff. And Ruthie learned more than me. And I think I can still remember like, numbers and basic things and stuff. But yeah, so we ended up in Rwanda and we went there to actually help. I was going to do plumbing on a counseling center they were going to build. That never got built, but that's what got us in the country. And when we arrived there, and that was kind of also the end of our like around the world, quote unquote, ticket. And there was other places we wanted to go past Rwanda, but we didn't know how long we wanted to be there. And we're just like, you know what, we'll just get like other flights after that. And we ended up spending about 4 or 5 months in Rwanda and East Africa. We spent a little bit of time in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Burundi. We actually bought a little car in Tanzania and drove it back to Rwanda, literally using paper maps and a compass. There was no road signs anywhere. And drove through the Serengeti and our friend Chuck, who now lives on Pender as well, he actually flew out for a crazy trip. We spent a few weeks with us there, and we drove back in this car, and yeah, Rwanda really grew on us. You know, everything we know about Rwanda now is the genocide that happened in '94. You know, Canada has its part of Romeo Dallaire that was there, head of the UN contingent, and yeah, the history is kind of crazy. And the deeper you get into it, it gets tough. It gets tough in terms of how you're going to deal with everything that happened. And just, you know, like, where does responsibility of the West begin and end? And where does our responsibility as human beings to help each other and maybe deal with the wrongs of the past? And all these things are still kind of there. But what kind of came to it for us is we kind of just met a bunch of locals and we're just like, hey, there's a lot of guys that could, like, for me, I was like, there's a lot of like unemployment is really high and the plumbing in general is really bad. Like, it's just incredibly simple and basic and just, you know, and they say plumbing is one of the things that probably saves as many lives as anything else. Just good sanitation, just clean water and sanitation. And so I'm like, this country could use some of this, you know, and could use a little bit of improvement. And there's all of these unemployed youth, a lot of maybe street kids is maybe the right word in some situations, but maybe let's say highly vulnerable youth. Maybe you're not directly living on the street. Maybe you are. Maybe it's some combination of those things. And yeah, so my idea as a plumber was, that's another thing I really appreciate actually of the Canadian, our skilled trades apprenticeship program, I think is actually still really great, where you often do 4 years, you do a bit of school, and then you do a lot of hands-on apprenticeship. And it's not really what happens over there. There you like go to school for a year or 2 years, and then you come out as, hey, you are a plumber. But you actually don't have a lot of experience. You don't really. So you're like, okay, you have this certificate that says you're a plumber, but do you know how to actually physically hands-on do it? And so I like the Canadian system. So I'm like, you know what if I can do something similar in Rwanda? And then what if I could do it in a business setting? So like one thing we ran into there was an organization running a trade school. And I was like, oh, this is great. And they're like, hey, you could come and teach plumbing here. I'm like, okay, great. Well, what are you guys doing now? They're like, well, we're doing carpentry. And they're like, oh, and we just graduated 12 people from the carpentry program. And I'm like, okay, what are they doing now that they're graduated? They're like, oh, well, I think one of them has found a job and the other ones are looking for jobs or they're doing something different. And you're kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of one of the essential points of going to school is that you can be employed after. Like, sure, this certificate is great. It's something, you accomplished something. But if the whole point of it was that you could go get a job or maybe, start your own business or whatever, and if that's not happening, then there's obviously a bit of a, something wrong or something that could be improved there. So that was kind of where I was looking at that was kind of the existing system there. And it's like, you know what? I kind of think like if I can work with people that are, maybe have training or don't have training, we send them for training, but really do the hands-on while we're doing work as a similar to a Canadian apprenticeship style system. That's what I think could maybe work. And so we just started doing it actually. And so we did this trip. So it ended up being a year. We came back to Canada in, I think it was June 2009. We stayed in Canada until December of that year. And then we just decided, well, we're going back to Rwanda. We're going to move there. The organization that brought us there and was doing this counseling center, we just didn't feel like it was a good fit for us. And they were like, hey, you could come join our organization. And I'm like, well, we could, but I'm like, what I'm hoping to do, I'm not sure it fits in what you guys are doing there. Plus, I'm also hoping to do it as a business, regardless of this business, quote unquote, business making money or not. But the fact that we can just use this like business structure to like hire people and train people. And so the idea of the business in Rwanda wasn't to like make money and profit, but it was to like, hey, let's grow. Can we grow a business where we can train more people?
Okay, I'm just going to jump in here because I'm so curious about this. You mentioned a little bit about the history of Rwanda, which is the recent awful history. When you guys are there, a couple questions here. Are you feeling echoes of that experience reverberating through the country still at that time?
Oh yeah. So right now we're in April. So April in Rwanda it's Memorial time. So the genocide started on April 6th or 7th. April 7th is the official day of the start of the genocide. And back then, I think it's less so now. So there'll usually be a week of dedicated like morning time. And lately, the last few years, it's gotten better. But when we were there, it was almost the month of April. You didn't expect to do a whole lot. It was a lot of memorials, a lot of public memorials. And frankly, we met people and some of our friends where they were genocide survivors. They were survivors maybe that lost most of their family. Like they lost their parents and they'd have one of our friends had one sister. And then one of our friends was like, hey, do you want to come out to this memorial? It's the memorial at where I grew up, where I survived the genocide as a child. They're doing a big kind of public memorial in that town, or in Rwanda, what they actually say, that hill. Rwanda is all hills. It's the land of 1,000 hills is its moniker. And it really is. It's just this really super hilly. The further west you go, it's almost like mountainous hills, very steep hills. And the further east you go, it's more like rolling savanna hills. But it's like on our hill, we're doing the memorial on this day. And so we're like, oh, sure, we'll come with you. I think he'd lost his parents and then while we were there, so that was interesting. We met some of his other kind of extended family that had survived and stuff. We saw another guy that we knew, and he was probably 20 at the time. So it's 15 years after the genocide. And so if he was a young child of maybe 7 or 8, so now he's like 22. And we knew he was working as a guard, essentially, quote unquote. Almost every house in Rwanda has a guard, and some of them have gates and security, and he was kind of like the night guard. So he's like just making sure nobody's breaking in, and they were like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And he's kind of like dressed up in like a suit, and he's like, "Well, they found the place where my family was killed, or I think maybe it was his father, and he was thrown in this pit, and they actually exhumed all the bodies, and now we're actually, for the first time, properly burying him." And we're like, "Oh." We thought we were just in this, like, okay, every year we're doing this memorial, but they still do this every year. Every year more bones are found and more bodies are found, whether it's construction or whether it's people that have even come out after the fact, perpetrators that have said, "Hey, this is where we killed these people and we threw them over in this area or buried them there in this mass grave," or whatever. And so it's still like a yearly thing that is ongoing. And as much as Rwanda, so now we're at like, I think last year was 30 years, 94. So now it's 31 years this year. So it's still kind of an ongoing thing. So as much as it's like in the past, and as much as the country really has developed itself, it's still kind of this like past that comes up once a year, specifically in April. Like April is like this time of memorial. So it's a pretty crazy, heavy thing. That you deal with. Yeah.
So I guess the next question I have is that your and Ruthie's decision to want to move back to this country, and from what you're saying about the situation about wanting to give people some employment and give some assistance, is this rooted in a feeling from being affected by what had happened in the recent past to Rwanda and the energy that existed in the country? Or
yeah, so Rwanda is quite a different country now. I would say it's complicated. It's probably the best word. But when you go to Rwanda, if you go and visit Rwanda now, it's one of the cleanest. It's one of the least corrupt countries in Africa. But it's also, there's not a lot of freedoms, maybe as a balance. So it's very different. If you literally you cross the border, if you cross a land border to Uganda or Burundi or Tanzania, it's very stark. And part of that speaks to Rwandans' culture and pride in their country and in their nation. So yeah, you find Rwanda's a very different place, and it kind of what drew us there. Like, okay, something's happening in this country, something a little bit different is happening, and you can't tell me that if you're like a 7-year-old post genocide and you don't have parents anymore, and you've been raised by extended family, or you've gotten by however you happen to get by. And then on the other side of the coin, a lot of the perpetrators who killed your family are still there. They're still around. Like, it was often done by people's neighbors and so it's just this really complicated, even with the people that we hired and worked in the plumbing business, we were dealing with this. A couple of the guys I first hired, I hired 2 guys, and they'd come out of a street kids program, and the guy running that program said, "Hey, these 2 have been like the most dedicated. We're going to send them to plumbing school. Can you take them after they finish the plumbing school and do like the kind of a apprenticeship they had to do some kind of practicum to fulfill their training." But basically I hired them. And then what we find out is that even in these guys, years later, one of the guys that was working there is like, "So my father's died and we're burying him tomorrow." And I'd hired a manager, a Rwandan manager at this point, who knew all these guys, and he was just really one of my closest friends, who I'm like, there's a really big gap between me as the Westerner and a Rwandan person who grew up in the street. Like, there's a very big gap. And
Sure.
I just I don't have the ability to communicate what I want to these guys. And so I have this Rwandan friend of mine, Ellie, who I'm like, you know what? I know you've worked with this organization, with these people when these guys were street kids, and you just seem like one of the most honest people that I've met in this country. And so, hey, do you want to work with me? I could really use some help, and I could use someone who could, like, we'd bought a vehicle for the business, who can like drive and like kind of help. He didn't have any plumbing skills, but I'm like, well, I really need kind of a manager, and you kind of help them with plumbing, and we can still teach you plumbing. And so then one day these guys come to them, and I ask Ellie, I'm like, I thought these guys were like thought, like, we'd met his mom. I didn't know he had a dad. And he's like, I didn't know either. I didn't know. And then what it was that his dad was in prison for genocide crimes, which is a lot of shame on somebody, right? Like, and who knows what those genocide crimes were. It could be also for, just doesn't mean you necessarily killed somebody, but it could mean that. But it was to the point where he just said, no, my dad's dead. And then years later, it's like, oh, well, actually, my dad wasn't dead, but he was in prison, but now he's dead. And so then we were like, oh, okay, this is a very real issue. Even in our little plumbing company, we're dealing with Hutus are the majority of the country, 85%, and Tutsis are like 14%. And actually, even in Rwanda, you hardly use the words Hutu and Tutsi anymore. And most people, if you met a Rwandan, most Canadians, that'll be the first thing they'll say, like, oh, the genocide, are you Hutu or are you Tutsi? And even now, I'm like cringing. I'm hearing myself say those words even.
Why are you cringing?
So one thing that the government did post-genocide, so the genocide was stopped by the Tutsi essential refugees that had grown up in Uganda and started civil war and wanted to come back to their own country, led by Paul Kagame, who is still the president of the country 30 years later. So as part of combating ethnic division, Hutu and Tutsis, you don't ever ask if somebody's Hutu or Tutsi. You would only use the words when you're referring to what happened during the genocide and before that.
Okay.
So during the genocide, everybody had identity cards that said you're Hutu or you're Tutsi, and people were literally killed because of what it said on their identity cards. And so they abolished identity cards, and that would say that, Hutu or Tutsi. And so talking about it in a modern day sense, you wouldn't do it. Rwandans would never do it, and you would get into social, what do I say that? A little bit.
That's okay, but what I'm hearing is that it was eliminated from the vocabulary.
Yeah,
in the
it was
country.
eliminated, and like there's been criticism and for and against that, and I'm no expert to say whether that was good or not.
But it's good insight. It's good historical insight. I appreciate.
But it's just it's a really real thing where people were Hutu or Tutsi, or maybe they are. But one thing to think of Hutu and Tutsi now, Rwanda is kind of a mono culture. There wasn't this culture of Hutu and Tutsi. It was more like Hutus were farmers and Tutsis were the cattle herders, essentially. But then it also, like the king, they had a traditional king. He was always Tutsi. But the stories were that you could, if you were a farmer and you had enough cows, you could then become Tutsi in a way. So it was almost more of a social standing rather than race per se. And there's a lot of books about it. I don't want to be the expert of. There's some people that would be on either side of that argument, but I think most of the Rwandans that I talk to, they would agree with that. Where they speak the same language, they have the same customs and cultural norms, and they intermarry. So if you were Tutsi, but you married a Hutu woman, all your kids are considered Tutsi because through the male line. But of course, through intermarrying, there's no way of that being separate, but that's just how was kind of done. So you're just like, okay. So it's definitely it was more of like a class system or more of a, anyway, I think that's an aside.
No, that's okay. Just to catch back up with the return to the country after coming back to Canada and then staying in Canada for roughly 6 months and then going back to Rwanda in December, and then you start this business.
Well, one other fun thing happened. So we booked our tickets. We booked one-way tickets to go to Rwanda in December, and then also in December we found out we were pregnant. So we're like, oh, we're pregnant, and we're moving to Rwanda. We still went. We put our dates back 6 weeks. We're like, okay, what does that mean? We packed baby stuff in our suitcases, and we managed to ship some stuff over there. And we still went. So we went and moved and rented a place there for the first year and started the plumbing business. And Ruthie, was pregnant and eventually in probably May, June, we flew back to Canada and gave birth to Kamea. our daughter, and then flew back to Rwanda. Probably a little too soon, but it was like 6 weeks after.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you ask Ruthie, she would definitely say it was way too soon. And at the same time, we didn't have much in Canada anymore. So that was also quite difficult coming back to Canada. And I think we borrowed somebody's place. They said, hey, we're going to be gone. You can come and stay in our place. That's kind of a temporary thing.
So how were you feeling about Canada at this point after the trip?
When I came back from our year of travels, I really struggled coming back to Canada. There's something coming back to your home culture when you've changed a lot, and the consumerism and the materialism that you experience after A, we've been living out of a suitcase, and B, we've just, our last end of our trip was living in Africa for 5 months. And there's some very wealthy, nice, rich places in Africa too, don't get me wrong. But just the attitude that we have towards material possessions over there is quite different. They don't value them the way we do. So now when we came back, it was post-2008 economic crash, and the economy's not doing great, and, gone wrong for certain people.
ATVs are for sale.
Yeah, ATVs, everybody's selling their, whatever. And so just hearing all the grumbling and complaining of how hard people's lives are in Canada, it was just it's really hard to hear when you're like, okay, I know it's not as good as it was and whatever, but you also don't really know what you're talking about. We're still among the richest people in the world here in Canada. I know you don't want to hear that. I know you want to say, look, all these problems we have here. And yes, we do have problems. I'm not saying we don't have problems. The level of things that people, your average person in Rwanda deals with, lower middle class, whatever, how they, if they're living off of $10 a day or $5 a day or whatever, you're living in a mud house with sometimes electricity or not, so I really struggled being back in Canada for
so
quite
this
a while.
Trip totally changed the two of you. And not everybody goes on a trip for a year and comes back and changes to the point where they want to move away from their country for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, right? What was at the core of this change, do you think, for you and Ruthie?
Yeah, I don't know. We both grew up in Christian homes, and so we had Christian values. And one of those values often is let's go help people in other places. And some people have very strong evangelistic beliefs of essentially converting people to Christianity. That's a very strong passion for people. For us, growing up in Christian home, I feel we had a very, my stronger beliefs were let's help people. Let's use the resources we have to help people. And I think for both of us, we grew up in Christian homes, and, Christianity is also a big spectrum of belief. And I think our beliefs of Christianity changed a lot along the way too. But one thing that really kind of held true throughout all that was hey, we have some skills that we could just help people with. And the weird thing about Christianity and Rwanda in particular, Rwanda pre-94, pre-genocide, was considered the most Christian nation on earth. More than Canada, more than the US. It was officially 95% Christian, unquote.
Surprising statistic. Okay.
But it also kind of tells you maybe what that Christianity means. So you have a country that's 95% Christian that went and picked up machetes and guns and killed 1 million people, 1 million neighbors. Because, there's a lot of reasons. I'm not going to get into a lot of the reasons of why they did it. Their culture is very different. Societal norms are very different. But if Christianity is anything, not killing somebody should be somewhere on the top of that list. I don't know what, Christian beliefs people have. So for us, and you're in this country that, in many ways maybe had Christianity all wrong or backwards, or it's by name, or it's whatever. It doesn't really matter to me. It's just here's a group of people that were hey, we have some skills. Let's just go see and help. And then Ruthie as a nurse, so she was doing some nursing, and she actually got into midwifery There was some friends from, well, we met them there, but they were from the Lower Mainland. They went and started what turned out to be a midwifery hospital, like a birthing hospital.
Okay.
And there wasn't one in the country. And they're like, hey, we're going to do this. And she was a midwife. And it took them a long time to get it built. And in the meantime, they were doing all these different clinics with all these really poor women who were pregnant, who couldn't afford to go see the doctor, or the healthcare they were getting was just really substandard. And so Ruthie got really involved and actually started her midwifery certification and working towards that there as well. But yeah, so our whole idea or rationale of what life is just kind of changed, where we're like, you know what? I don't know. Canada, we kind of do life this way. Rwanda, Africa, they do life that way. And other parts of the world, they do it differently. But like, push comes to shove, people want to have like healthy families, and they want to have a decent life. You know, they don't want to be poor, or they don't want to be unhealthy, or they don't want to have poor healthcare. And so just like, you're kind of like, what part can we play in this narrative? What limited resources can we do?
That's amazing, really.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thought to have, and it's an amazing thing to act on. It's one thing to have those thoughts. I think a lot of people at some point in their lives think those things, but it's a whole other thing to actually go act it out. When you guys went back after that 6-week period after your daughter was born, how long did you plan on staying? Did you have an idea? Was it indefinite?
It was indefinite. We were there open-ended. We had sold our house in Edmonton. We actually bought a house in Rwanda, in kind of like pretty middle class in the capital city in Kigali. As far as, there wasn't a lot of other Westerners, but we had a few Rwandan friends in the area. And we're like, hey, there was kind of definitely like, you'd almost call it like the American or the Western part of the city with big giant houses, and which is just an interesting conversation. But us having like young children, where at that time we weren't looking at like, hey, we need to get our kids into a school that, they could learn things to Western standards or whatever. That time we're like, hey, we have a newborn, and then later on our son was born too, and we're like, hey, we have these 2 young kids, and we can live out on the edge of the city and not really have issues with that so much. But yeah, so it was kind of just like the strategy of like, what can we do and what can we learn while we're here? Like, it was like, Rwanda is really, I think, because of their history and their culture, both of those things, information is a premium. We're very free. Like, even having this conversation, we're free with knowledge, information. If somebody asks me like plumbing, hey, why is my hot water tank doing XYZ?
I think I asked you that
like
a couple weeks ago.
Like yours. And be like, oh, okay, you probably have this problem. You need an expansion tank. That's what you need. But in Rwanda, they really value information. So if you're not a close, trusted friend or person, they're not going to give you that information. And maybe the history of the country, they've been betrayed by friends and neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's maybe deeper than that, like all the cultural things. But what we would find is they would be very free with material things, like, hey, borrow my car. Like, it would be very rude to say, no, you can't borrow my car.
Wow, really?
So if your friend, if he's actually your friend, came to you and say, hey, I really need to borrow your car today. I got this appointment. I can't get there. You'd be like you'd be so rude if you said no. And you'd be like, oh, I just got this new car. Is he going to scratch it? Is he going to fill it up with gas after? Like, no, you would, they just give you your car. Like, here you go.
Okay.
Like, that's just part of their culture. Like, that's what they would do.
Incredible.
But if you ask them something, like, even if you ask some of these questions about Rwanda, like, hey, why do you guys do X, Y, Z in your culture? Like, why do you raise kids in this way? Why do you do that? They're just a lot more, that for information is like valuable, and they're not just going to hand out that value to anybody unless you know them. Which is the same thing, like, we're not just going to, like, if you have a brand new car, you're not just going to give that to anybody as well. But for them, that, like, it's kind of like reverse. And we're
so
just like,
interesting.
Yeah. So we're like, oh, so that was like one of the things we learned about. And then one of the things that really kind of like, as much as I come back to Canada and it's like, oh, there's consumerism and materialism, but there's still also like me, they're like, oh, hey, can I borrow your car? Hey, can I use your computer? And you're kind of like, oh, I just brought that computer from Canada. This is brand new and I can't fix it if it breaks. And well, at the same time, like, so that's like showing me like, okay, sure, you're trying to like adjust to living here, but you're also a long ways away from being Rwandan. You still are very Canadian, regardless of what what changes you've made in your life, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's interesting living in places like that. The more deeper you dive into the culture and
Yeah, well, let's dive deeper in. So
Yeah.
just so people understand, and I think you mentioned this earlier, that you spent 8 years there.
Basically 7 years. So we moved there January 2010, and we left there, well, I guess it'd be about 6.5 years. We left in June 2016.
Okay, and you mentioned a couple details about things that were going on with employees when you first, I guess, started the business, and maybe if we go a little further exploring that, as year 1 and 2 and 3 went along, how was the business unfolding for you? And maybe if you could sort of like give a little bit of explanation as to like what was happening on that end of things.
Yeah, well, and I think like the plumbing business was, I would say like one of 3-4 things that was like, this is why we're here, I would say. So I wouldn't say it's like the thing, like, hey, we're here to do plumbing and fix things. Like one other thing that we actually did is we had another Rwandan friend who we met there, and we became really close with him. And he was a genocide survivor, and he had a stepmom who was still had a house, but he's like a 25-year-old guy, and so he actually lived with us for 2 years. And first he was like, hey, I could be your like guard, I could be your like guy who helps you get stuff done. Because in Rwanda, people are like, oh, you have house help? Why would you have house help in Rwanda? And then you're like, well, go try to pay the water bill. See how long. It could take you an entire day, at least back then. I think a lot of these things have really improved recently. But it could take you an entire day to pay the water bill. And how can it take you an entire day to pay the water bill? Well, you got to first try to find the office because there's not signs and whatever. And you got to get in line, and you're going to stand in line for an hour or two. You can get to the front of that line. Where do you live? Okay, well, we're going to have to send somebody to go read your water meter. And then you're going to have to wait for him to come back. Maybe you got to come back the next day. And then finally they're going to calculate, okay, you owe $4. It was really cheap, but it would take you all day. And there I go. And then you'll pull out your $4. And they're like, oh, no. You don't pay here. Here's the bank account that you can pay this into. So then you take another trip across down to the right bank, and then wait in line for 2 or 3 hours to go pay the $4 into the bank account. And then you'd have to return with your receipt and show them, hey, look, I paid the $4. And like, it was just like, so you're like, oh, okay. So this is why, even like Rwandans, this is why they have house help, because like you'll go to the market to buy vegetables and it can take you like hours. You got to negotiate on the price. And you're like, well, I already know the price. I bought this last week. It was it's like 50 cents a pound for that. They're like, no, it's for you. It's $1.50 or whatever, and then you spend like, okay. And eventually you get back down to 50 cents or whatever, And so like life just, it runs at a very different pace. And so we had this Rwandan friend who lived with us for 2 years. And one thing he really wanted to do was work with like actual street kids, these kids that were just up from our place, like probably a 2-minute walk, was this little tiny market. And there's these kids that would come in, they'd go wherever during the day, and then at night they'd sneak into the market and like sleep under these wood stalls. And they were anywhere from 7 to 12 years old. And so they didn't necessarily, I wouldn't say they were orphans. Rwandans have big families. So if you're a very poor family and you now have 5-6 kids and your oldest is 10, like, sorry, you got to fend for yourself. And so that kid would sometimes voluntarily leave. Sometimes maybe they'd be kicked out of the house. Sometimes they'd voluntarily leave. They're just like, hey, there's nothing for me here. I'm going to go find my own way in life. And they'd kind of get this like little crew. So this Rwandan friend say, hey, I want to start a street kids program. And we're like, okay, great. We'll help you as best we can. And it's your program. You do it. We'll try to raise some funds. And so we did with him for, I think it was a couple of years. And we actually, eventually we rented a big house. And we put these 12 kids in a house. And we hired a couple of guys to take care of them and to cook for them. And we got them into a school. And so it was interesting. And then we'd like start raising money. And it was about $1,000 a month, I think, Canadian, to kind of cover all these expenses for these 12 kids, which is not, an insignificant amount. And through that process, actually, we joined with a small nonprofit in Edmonton, actually, as well. And they were called IHS, International Humanitarian Services. But essentially what they did is say, hey, any funds you raise, if you want to write your friends and your family and go on a podcast with Chris and raise money, we'll get you official Canadian, charitable donation status where you can give charitable receipts. We'll take X percentage as an administration fee to pay for our accountants and our side of things, and which was like 10%. They would take 10%, and so then we started doing that, and then we're also like, the plumbing business isn't exactly paying for our bills, but luckily we had bought a house in Edmonton, and then we'd owned it for 5 years, and it had dramatically increased in value. I was going to say we timed the market, but we didn't time any market. It just happened. It just we just happened to be there and buy a house, and then the house doubled in value, and then we sold it. And so that's kind of how we were able to make it work. We were like, hey, from this money, we can buy our own house in Rwanda. Not super fancy, not a super nice house, but a workable house, mortgage free. And we can kind of just raise. So after a couple of years, I think it was 2 years after living there, where we kind of had joined with this organization. Okay, I think you could use, some Canadian official status to what you guys are trying to do. And we're like, yeah, you're kind of right. Like it was a Canadian we met in Rwanda, and he's like, hey, I know some people. You should connect with these people. And so for a while there, yeah, we raised funds for this Street Kids Home. We raised some funds for our own kind of life sustainability. And then the business also kind of provided, kind of when it got going, it would sometimes provide funds. It essentially, for the life of the business, it just kind of paid for the expenses and the salaries of the guys. But then we did a few jobs. So I got into doing, just being a Canadian there, the expatriate scene in Rwanda is not that big. And so a lot of our friends were Americans and from different places. And then some people they were like the American Embassy in particular, I think they had 100 jobs or 100 families working just for the American Embassy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
How that makes sense, I have no idea. In one country you have 100 families. I don't know, whatever. And so they work for the American Embassy, and people that work for the American Embassy kind of expect their plumbing to work, and they expect things to work properly, and they rent really nice, big, fancy houses for their staff. And yet they still have the same really basic non-working plumbing in 95% of the homes that they rent. And so then somebody found out, you're a professional plumber and you're doing this? Okay, we need to get you in. Let me get you hooked up with American Embassy staff. The first embassy we worked for was the Dutch Embassy. And we went into the Dutch Embassy and changed their whole water system, pulled out the pumps and put in new pumps and new piping. And then kind of word spread. It was interesting. All of a sudden it's I had to have the American ambassador's wife called me. Our plumbing at our residence is terrible. And so it was interesting. So we kind of got into that world where it actually did pay for our living expenses to some degree for a few years. And we worked at the Russian embassy, and we worked in the Japanese embassy. And one fun story at the Japanese embassy is Kamea must have been 4, and she was going to preschool. And the preschool she was going to was kind of in the general neighborhood of where I drove past the Japanese ambassador's house to go to her preschool. And then so her preschool was done, 2:00 in the afternoon. And so we were doing a big job. We were putting in pumps and cisterns and everything for the Japanese ambassador's house. And I'm like, oh, okay. And Ruthie's like, well, can you just go by and pick up Kamea and then, check in with your guys, see how they're doing, and then bring her home. And so I did that. And I'm like, I left the guys. They know what to do. They're working. And then I pick up Kamea and I drive in, and, all the staff and the guards, they know who I am. So they just let me in. And then I just told Kamea, okay, just hang tight, or whatever, roll the windows down. You can sit and, read your book or whatever. But she's 4, right? So then all of a sudden, I don't know if she had to go to the bathroom or she's thirsty or I don't know. All of a sudden, she starts walking around in this like huge kind of ambassador's residence compound. And the Japanese ambassador's wife saw her. It's like, who's this little girl walking around? And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, and they're like, no, I want to have a tea party. So she like had a tea party with Kamea and then gave her a gift of like origami and stuff like that. So it was really kind of interesting. But yeah, so it kind of became our like niche a little bit, is that we worked with all these embassies. And then from there, actually, we started working with other just international organizations. We actually redid. We put in a really cool water system for one of the famous stories in Rwanda. And if you want to know more about Rwanda's development from post-genocide to where it is now, some guys did a documentary called Rising from Ashes. And it's just about cycling. Cycling is a big sport in Rwanda. I got connected with, it was a couple of Americans, Jacques and Kimberly. And Jacques was the first American to ever compete in the Tour de France in the 80s. And so post that, he was also like, hey, how can I use what I got to make things better in the world? So he ended up, somebody invited him to Rwanda, and it's all in the documentary. And basically they ended up in Rwanda at the same time. And so they're up probably 2 hours. It's 2 hours from where we lived in Kigali in the city of Musanze. And where it's actually where all the volcanoes and the mountain gorillas are. And it's just one of the most beautiful places you can go. And then I got connected with them, and they're like, hey, we want to build a world-class cycling center where we can, train these people to be world-class athletes. And we can also maybe bring international teams in to train, because Rwanda is actually very high elevation. So Kigali, where we live, the capital city, it's about in the middle. It's like 1,500 meters, which is about 5,000 feet. And then if you go to Musanze, up in the mountains or up high, have to look it up, but it's significantly higher. Like it's quite high. And so if you're doing high altitude training, it's a great, plus you have great weather. Rwanda's 2 degrees off the equator. You have great weather all year round. And so I got connected with them, and they're like, okay, we want to put in we want drinking clean water out of all of our taps. Like if we're bringing in world-class athletes, professional cyclists,
we want them not to get sick from
we don't want them to get sick. And that's like not normal, right? So it's just really interesting, the people that you meet in some of these scenarios. And like, I'm a plumber from Alberta, from Canada. And I got people like ambassadors calling my phone like, hey, I got this plumbing problem. And I got this other guy who's like semi-famous, this famous cyclist. And he's like, hey, come in and help us make this thing better. And so, yeah, I was really privileged to like be able to experience a lot of those things. It was really neat.
Yeah. As the experience was approaching its end, because what I'm hearing over and over again from these stories is just like such an interest and involvement in the country from what you're describing.
Yeah.
It sounds like it really touched you.
Yeah, and I think Rwanda still means a lot to us. Like I try to go back. It's been now almost 9 years since we left. And I try to go back once a year.
Oh, really?
Still, yeah.
Wow.
So it's been 9 years since we left. And when we left, our kids were quite young. They were like 4 and 6. And I was like, you know what? I want to take the kids back before they grow up. Army was like not quite 4 when we left. He doesn't have a lot of memories. Who has memories from when they were 3 or 4? I don't.
I do not
maybe
either.
one. I might have one. I don't know. So they had this connection to Rwanda, but not a lot of memories. And I'm like, I really want to take them back before they get into high school. And so we decided last year was the year, 2024. We're like, okay, it's got to be this year. It works in our schedule, and the kids are not quite in high school, and we're just going to take a year off. And then it turned into 6 months off, because apparently traveling the world for a year is expensive. So we're like, okay, but maybe we can make 6 months work. Let's do 6 months. Okay. And then Ruthie, she works on Pender as a nurse. She got a leave of absence from her job. And, I work for myself. So we're like, okay, sorry, everybody. We're leaving. We're leaving on this day. I know there's not a lot of plumbers on this island already. We're going to make it worse for 6 months. But yeah, so then I want to take them back. So that was the idea. And then I also was like, but I also want to travel a little bit too. So instead of just flying to Rwanda, the broader dream kicked back in. We flew to South Africa, to Cape Town, where we have some friends. And we bought a Land Cruiser. And we're like, we're going to drive to Rwanda, which we didn't quite do. But we did drive. It's quite far, South Africa to Rwanda. But we took 2 months and we drove across South Africa and we drove into, the small little countries. If you look at the map, there's Lesotho and there's Eswatini, or Swaziland is what it was called. Now it's Eswatini. And we kind of we didn't want to be rushed. So we're like, hey, we just want to take the time. We don't want to be driving every single day. So like maybe we'll drive somewhere and then stay for 2 or 3 days and then we'll camp. And we had like a rooftop tent on the Land Cruiser and had a fridge and a little 2-burner stove out the back with a little propane tank on the top. And we only packed like tiny amount because it was just it wasn't it wasn't a giant Land Cruiser. It was just kind of a normal sized Land Cruiser. And I'm like, I want to take the kids back, but I also want them to like experience Africa and like experience other countries. Rwanda is one country and these other countries are also very different and very interesting. And so, yeah, we spent 2 months. We drove across South Africa and Lesotho and we got into Kruger National Park, which is their big game park, and saw, elephants at 3 feet away and like had some crazy elephants and animals experiences. And then we got as far as, like Johannesburg. And then we're like, you know what? For us to drive from here to Rwanda, it's probably going to take us a month to drive up and to drive back.
How many kilometers is it?
From Rwanda to Johannesburg, which is eastern South Africa, which is, kind of a close run as you can get. I think it's still like 7,000 kilometers.
Oh, that's pretty far.
It's pretty far.
It's like driving across Canada, basically.
And then it's like, there's also like Zimbabwe and Zambia and Malawi and Tanzania to get there, and border crossings. And, border crossings aren't always the fastest or the best. So we're like, you know what? We do have this limited 6 months sounds like a really long time. And it sure did when we were planning all this trip. And I'm like, hey, we're going to do all these things and drive all over. And then I kind of like, oh, okay, this trip that I was hoping is more like actually a 1-year trip. And we met people that were doing that in a year. I'm like, okay, that seems like a more reasonable. So then we actually flew from Johannesburg and we flew up to Rwanda. And then we spent 6 weeks there. We still had a few close friends, like Ellie, our manager, was still running the plumbing business. And, other friends are really close friends and a few expat friends and mixed, like one of our friends is Canadian and she's married to Rwandan and they've lived there for 20 years. And actually they just recently moved to Canada. I would say back to Canada, but some of it's just moved to Canada. And, but it was really interesting to go back and our kids to experience Rwanda. Sure, a very different Rwanda after maybe 8 years, but still like, oh, this is where I grew up. And we actually managed to find our house that we used to own and live in. And it was actually being operated as a guest house. So we didn't stay there, but we got to go in and tour around.
Oh, cool.
And it was it was neat. It was really neat. And then we got to, even meet new friends, which is, the turnover rate for foreigners and expatriates in a place like Rwanda was a lot of people would come for 2 years, which 2 years is, still a significant amount of time. Like if you have a contract with some foreign aid agency or something or an embassy, often it was 2 years. And then sometimes as long as 4 years. But the people that stayed longer than 4 years was not that many. It was a pretty small number. But we still had a few friends there. And then you meet new people. We go there and like, oh, where are you guys from? And we met new people when we were there. And then actually the Jespersons, Jorgen and Leanne and their kids, they came out for a visit as well. They came for a couple of weeks as well and met us there. So that was kind of neat.
So pretty easy to meet other people and develop friendships and acquaintances there. Is there something to the energy of the country that helps promote that? Or is the fact that there's just like people from different parts of the world? Or I
think when you're in a different country, especially like Rwanda doesn't have a huge foreigner population. the people that live there, almost everybody knows everybody. It's kind of like on Pender. You don't know everybody on Pender, but you kind of know a lot of people or most people. And you know, people get lonely too. It's hard to break into culture sometimes, you know, and depending how you live might make it harder to break into that culture. And if you know, hey, I'm only here for 2 years, and I'm like, we found moving there, it actually took us 2 years to feel settled. Like, oh, we can do life in this country. Like, we can do the practical. We can figure out how to pay the water bill and how to get the groceries and how to find we found that took 2 years. It took 2 years of living there. And then we could like take a breath and like, oh, this feels kind of comfortable.
Okay.
Living here. And maybe that's just like, I don't know if that's probably a normal thing. Maybe moving anywhere. I don't know.
It's interesting to consider because 2 years sounds like such a long period of time.
Yeah. And so it's interesting when people only lived there for 2 years.
Right.
And then even after about a year and a half, they're already starting to plan their exit out of that place. And so you're like, how much did you really get done in your time here? You know, like, sure, maybe they just slotted into a program. This program is this machine that kind of just keeps moving. But yeah, is one of the reasons why we wanted to stay longer, where we just like, okay, it's hard to get anything done here. It's hard to build the relationships to make like real positive change. And like, how do you meet people? How do you meet the Rwandans that, you know, for us, that are going to help make the change? And it wasn't just the people we first met. And sure, a lot of those people still remained our friends and close friends, but we kind of found the people like, hey, these people we kind of see eye to eye with, or we're similar to these people. We have the same kind of goals and ideas of how to do things. And that just takes time. But yeah, then after like 7 years, then we were also like, okay, I think it's also, or for me, it was like after 6 years, I was like, okay, I think it's time for us to go like living full time. And just it's a stressful place to live. It was just really stressful, and we had a lot of trauma that we dealt with, and it was kind of just the time to go, I guess, and maybe like people use the word being burnt out, and it's maybe the right way to use it, or maybe not, but we were like truly and utterly burnt out when we left there. And maybe even just like PTSD. And what actually I found looking back at the end of the day wasn't that our experiences were unique per se, but it actually probably was like more, hey, this is what life can be like in a developing country. Like, the healthcare system is not great. They have a saying, like they just have a saying in Rwanda, like, people die. And that's the saying, like, people die. And it's kind of a fatalistic saying. And sometimes it's self-fulfilling, because maybe if we didn't expect them to die, we could work harder for them to keep living, especially in like a hospital. But yeah, we had a bunch of traumatic experiences of a Canadian friend who died there, and close Rwandan friends who lost twins who died there. And then just a lot of like, you know, it's hard to build those good relationships. And there's a lot of desperate people in a place like Rwanda. People will steal from you and betray you. And it just got to the point where I was like, okay, I think, you know, we've lived here for 7 years or almost 7 years. And it's just like, I don't know how much more risk I want to put on my young kids and my family, and then also how much energy, how maybe successful can you really be when you're in a state of like, okay, every day. And as much as we knew the culture quite well when we lived there, we knew how it worked. We had an American friend there who lived there he might still be living in Rwanda, been there like 30 plus years. And he's completely fluent in the language, and he's, you know, knows how to get everything done. He's like, I feel like sometimes I feel really Rwandan. And then I step outside my house, and then I'll have some child yell at me, hey, Mzungu, Mzungu, which is like white person. Mzungu just means white person. And in Rwanda, at least, it's not derogatory. In other countries, it might be a derogatory term. I wouldn't interpret it as derogatory. It's just very practical. You're a white person. But with that, it's like, hey, you're a white person with privilege, with means with finances, help a guy out, give me something. And it's just kind of been ingrained in a lot of the kids and everything. And you're just like, he's like, even my neighbors, I've lived next to these people for 10 years and still they'll just be like, hey, give me money. Hey, give me a book, give me a pen, give me a, and you're just like, it's just like this like constant, maybe, pressure, this constant like grating of like, it's just like, okay. And you learn to live with it, but it also is just like, it's just kind of like energy. It's just hard to keep that energy of like just pulling you out. And so part of us leaving was like, hey, we're kind of here independently in this country. We didn't have an organization with resources behind us. And the longer we were in Rwanda, the longer we actually lost connection with Canada and Canadians and our friends even. And it'd be like we'd come back to Canada and they're just like, we don't know where, Edmonton didn't feel like home anymore. Like it had been years since we lived there, and we'd go back there and we're just like, our group of friends and our close-knit circle of people there, we come back and it's not there anymore for whatever reason. And, and partly it's like, well, we were the ones who left as well, right? Like, so people move on with friendships and relationships, and then you're like, okay. And then we would come back from Rwanda, and then also being, it would feel like we were quite needy of like, hey, we don't have a place to live. We don't have, tons of finances. We don't have, all these different things. We come back with like, come back to give birth to kids, and come back if we're sick and needing all the kind of healthcare resources, and, and so that was like also like a real thing where you're just like, okay, how are we need a kind of a home base maybe again. And who knows in the future what, we don't have any plans to move back to Rwanda or anything. I'll probably continue going once a year. I plan to go maybe in the fall again.
What do you do when you go back there?
Well, so up until this last trip, the business was I still owned the business. I was still actually going online and paying the taxes. And I had basically, the business it had two accounts. It had a bank account that the manager had access to and the bank account that I had access to. And depending, sometimes they would pay the money into his account, and sometimes you're like, hey, I got this expense coming up. Can you transfer over X amount of funds? And then I'll look and I'm like, okay, I got this many funds in the bank account. I can transfer you what I got, or like, and then I could pay the taxes online from Canada. But it got to the point where I was like, you know what, I really, I want this to be your business. I want you guys to own this. And the best way over there was not to hand over the business to him, but I'm like, for tax purposes, it was far better for him to start his own business. Here in Canada, I think it's a 7-year audit period. CRA gets 7 years to audit you. Mm-hmm. And if they missed it after 7 years and whatever, over there, there's no time period. So if I happen to make a mistake on the taxes 15 years ago, and they audit you, and they're like, hey, you should have paid this bill for $20, 15 years ago. But guess what? The fine for not paying it was $200. And now we're going to take the interest. And the tax code over there was very difficult. I know people in Canada won't like me for saying this, but dealing with CRA is it's not the Rwandan Revenue Authority. I was like, and I get like, yeah, it's not always clear over here what you pay and what you have to pay and not, and that's why I just have an accountant that just takes care of that stuff for me over here. But often they would change the law and not tell you.
Oh my gosh.
They'd change the deadline filing date and not tell you. And then I'd go to pay it. And they're like, oh, you should have paid this a month ago. And you're like, what do you mean? Oh yeah, we changed it. Oh, how was I supposed to know that? I don't know. You whatever. Not our problem, kind of thing. And then you have fines and fees. And so I was just like, okay, I want him to start kind of on a nice clean sheet. And so I essentially gave him all like the company assets and tools. And I brought most of my Canadian tools over So we had like a pipe threader and we had all sorts of tools and stuff. And I was like, you know what? You kind of keep going with the business, but register your own business. And then I'll close this one down, which was actually very difficult to do, but we managed in the end. And it was kind of just another closing of the chapter of our lives there. And, you know, our kids going back, seeing Rwanda again and kind of seeing like, oh, this is where we lived for X amount of years and whatever. And that's kind of, you know, what's the podcast? It's like kind of how we came to Pender. When we left Rwanda, we left June 2016. And, you know, Ruthie and I had ever only lived in Alberta, all sorts of different places in Alberta. I grew up in the far north, 8 hours north of Edmonton. And then we'd lived in Edmonton for 7 years, and Ruthie's family is closer to Edmonton. And, but like I said, the longer we were away, Edmonton just didn't feel like home anymore. It just wasn't home. And when we originally came back, we were coming for a year. We were like, you know what? We're feeling really burnt out, really exhausted. We need to, you know, get our lives somewhat back in order. And let's at least go back to Canada for a year. Let's take a break. Let's kind of reevaluate, essentially. And let's get some rest. And we have a friend, you know, he was somewhat of a long lost friend, Bobby Cooper. I went to, we first knew each other like back, we did like grade 6 and 7 together. And then his family moved to like Williams Lake. And then we got reconnected again, but essentially hadn't seen him in like 15 years. And he wrote me when we were still living in Rwanda about a year before we left. And he's like, hey, I'm here. I'm like coming to Kenya with my family. And they did a big trip. They went to Ireland and then they went to Kenya. And they weren't living on Pender yet, but Shanda was living here, I think, part-time, also doing Firewatch stuff and living on Pender. And so they had some family connections to Pender. And we were like, okay. So when we decided to leave, it was actually a year. And so we took a whole year in Rwanda to be like, okay, we're going to leave in a year. Where are we going? And in that year, Bobby had he'd come for a 2-day visit. It was like a whirlwind two-day visit. I took him around the country I had this old white UN style Land Cruiser. Just a big old ugly beast that broke down multiple times while he was there for 2 days. And then later that year, they ended up moving to Pender. I think they moved in October of 2015. And it was right when we were looking like, hey, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And he's like, hey, if you're looking for a place that's like quiet and restful, like the Gulf Islands, Pender Island, you can't do a lot better than this in Canada. Like, it's just like, you got the ocean, you got all these walking trails, you got this great community. And we're kind of like, hey, okay, why not? And like, I mean, we moved to Africa. Like, how? Like, we can move to Pender.
It's a breeze.
We can move to some other
into
place. Like, I have a few aunts in the Lower Mainland, so it's not like BC is, you know, new to us or something. But we'd never been to the Gulf Islands, so we're just like, at the same time, we're like, hey, why not? And so we actually showed up September 1st, 2016. It was like 2 days before school was starting or something like that. And Kamea just like went in and did grade 1, like having been on the island for 2 days. And that's just kind of how we got here. We were looking for a place of like kind of to get rested and to get healed. And then after a year or a year and a half, we went back to Rwanda and we kind of decided, hey, I don't think we're going back. And then we're like, you know what? Can we stay on Pender? Is this a thing we can do? And then we managed to buy a house that everybody I talked to said they looked at the house because it had so many. It was so cheap. It had so many problems that everybody's like, yeah, I looked at buying that house, but it just needed too much work. And then we were also like, well, we've been kind of living in Africa and we basically don't really have any money and any really like job. You know, the bank doesn't really want to lend us a lot of money. This is kind of the only house we can afford. So, you know, it's better than nothing, essentially. It's better than living in a holiday camping trailer or something, right? So, and it's a home base. And we've spent a lot of years and time fixing up that place. But essentially how we got here. And then we did go back to Rwanda in a year and a half later, 2017, because we'd still owned our house there, and we like kind of sold off all of our earthly goods over there and brought back what we wanted to bring back, and eventually sold the house, and we've kind of just been here, I guess, ever since. And I go back about once a year. And for up until last year, it was to like, hey, how's the plumbing company doing? How are you guys doing? And then we do have a few key friends. We have a friend of ours that runs like a school. Everything there, being so Christian over there, everything runs through a church. So he runs a church and then a school. And we've talked about, maybe we'll start a trade school with him. Maybe we can do a plumbing school that we could integrate into like an apprenticeship, style thing. So that's something that still may or may not happen. Who knows?
Do you plan on basically being tied to that country for maybe the rest of your life, or do you see an end happening to
I don't know. Like Rwanda is like something that's really close to my heart. We like both Ruthie hadn't been there in quite a few years. And when we get there, I just feel really comfortable there. Like the driving over there is a bit of madness. Like they do have traffic lights and they do have police officers, but the moment you don't see a traffic light or a police officer, you can also still kind of do what you want, and but to me, I I thrive in that a little bit. It kind of gets the blood going a little bit, and so we went back and we just felt like, I'm comfortable here. Even though we hadn't lived there in a long time, we still know how to do, like, sure, the country looks different and newer and cleaner, but we're like, we understand this country to some degree, where we feel like I would feel really comfortable meeting an average Rwandan on the street, and I know kind of how to give them a hard time or bug them a little bit, or
awesome.
And they have all these motorbike taxis running around, and I just heckle him a little bit and barter with him because he expects me to pay double the normal local rate, and it's just you kind of understand the culture a little bit in the country, and it's so I don't know. I'm not really sure what our long-term connection. When I go this fall, this will be the first time I go back where we don't really have any, the business has been shut down, and I mean, it's still going on, but I don't have any legal connection to it anymore. And, so we'll see what that looks like. And it may and we do want to help our friend with his school, and he doesn't have any like big donors, and government requirements change over there a lot. And he's just like, they're like, oh, okay, for you to get your like official nonprofit status, you need to have XYZ. And then he works real hard and he fundraises. And then the bar moves again, and then the bar moves again. And it's just happened to him maybe like 3 times already. And there's no such thing as like grandfather laws over there. So it's a bit tough to be like, hey, but we already got our building permit. We already got our school certificate and like, nope, not no more. You don't. And so it's, it's tough, but we just like, he just wants what's best for his country and his people. We're like, okay, well, we're one small part of that. And, we no longer have like we no longer have affiliation to raise funds for him or anything, but we know kind of who we could send funds to get it to him. And, but it's also, I don't know. We'll see what that looks like. Not quite sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Craig, I'm so grateful that you did this. Like it's interesting. Like I didn't really know what to expect about how this was going to go. And, I feel like I learned so much about this experience. And just to let the audience know a little bit as well, too, like we had a conversation at Slow Coast a few weeks ago, and we sort of talked a little bit about how we were going to do this interview. And, like just hearing a vague story about, oh, you and Ruthie lived in Africa for a certain period of time. That's all I knew a couple of years ago. And I think a lot of people are going to love having heard what you said about your experience there, because you speak with a lot of heart about what you and Ruthie experienced and wanted to accomplish there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, just to, use a baseball term about rounding third and bringing this on home. How would you like to slide into home plate at the end of this interview here with style or with grace or both?
Well, Pender has become home for us. It's been great. We've now lived on Pender 8.5 years, longer than I've lived anywhere since where I grew up. Longer than we lived in Rwanda, longer than we lived in Edmonton. And it's just really, it's where our kids grew up. It's that they've done, Kamea's in her last year of school here. She's done 9 years of school here now. And it's just amazing. Like the community is amazing. And I know you've interviewed so many people, key people in this community. And it's just like, no community is perfect. There's still, the gossip and the rumors and all those things. But at the same time, you can find your place, and you're like, there's all these really good people on this island that you can like connect with and feel at home with. And we have these good friends. And whether it's playing disc golf, with the Tuesday night gang, which has been a fun time. Most of the time, I like to give those guys a hard time on Tuesday nights, but it's the Pender's has really become home, and we just love it here. And so it's really been great. So when we looked at coming to Pender, we're like, and we weren't sure if we were gonna go back to Rwanda. That was even one thing we looked at. We're like, hey, if we do move back to Rwanda, if we could have a place on Pender to come back to, and we're like, hey, we were like, this would be amazing, and then we're like, or maybe we should just stay. This is a great place to live. And there's so many great people here. And just like the nature and everything else as well. Yeah. So it's just like, we've really enjoyed our time here. And it's just been a great fit for us. Yeah.
Any other last words before we end off here?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Rwanda. I hope I don't come across as like someone who, puts Rwanda in a nice, neat box. I think it truly is one of those places. The more you know about the country, like what I thought I knew about Rwanda after being there for a year, and then you get to that 2-year mark, and then it's like there's another layer, and you're like, oh, okay, I understand this part. And then it's like the 4-year mark and the 5-year mark, and then even after I keep up with, like, I follow all the news, and there's still like. There's not war happening in Rwanda, but it's immediately across the border in Congo, and there's tensions and there's fighting, and there's a lot of accusations of who's doing what and international. It's we're definitely pretty privileged in Canada, and there's a lot of people in the world. I feel a lot of like a lot of people from countries, they're just given a pretty bad image, like, oh, why are you coming to our country? Can't you go back to your country? Or why do you? And you're like, we don't know how privileged we are in this country. We don't sometimes start taking you go to another country and you drive through a sketchy looking area and you're like, oh, glad I don't live there, whatever, but at the same time you're there is some responsibility, and one reason why we want to help out people, you're like, okay, I think there's been, at least on Pender and BC, there's a lot of talk of like, our colonial history and First Nations people. What have we done with First Nations people? And there is, people that are in that world, there is that talk on a colonization level as well, where we're like, oh, why do these South American refugees keep coming across the Mexican border and from El Salvador and Nicaragua? And then you're like, well, what about like the history of, the CIA that went in and, overthrew the rightfully elected president. And now we just create havoc for the name of fighting communism or whatever. And now we've turned these countries upside down. And then we're like, oh, why are these people trying to come to a stable place? I don't know. And you're like, so there's some interesting people out there. Like, I don't know if you know Trevor Noah. Do you know who Trevor Noah is?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Anyway, he has some great things if you follow Trevor Noah, of like, like, why are you coming to our country? And you're like, because you brought us here. You came to our country first, and it's just like trying to have like a global mindset of what life looks like, and just this assumptions like, oh, all these bad people are coming into our country. And I know that's a obviously political thing with Trump right now and everything, and right wing, left wing, and we're becoming all polarized. And you're like, you know what? This world's a big place, and like I frankly, I had a hard time viewing myself as Canadian when I came back to Canada. I didn't feel myself as Rwandan though either, because I'm like, we're definitely not Rwandan. That's clear, even though we live there. But I also didn't feel Canadian, so you're kind of feeling like in this lost no man's land. Like, where do we fit? Luckily, we have this Canadian passport, and we can come back to Canada. But like, I can't imagine, somebody who's like, fled their village and their town because of whatever the situation is, and they're like, we're just trying to get a better life for ourselves. And so just really, really appreciate what we have in Canada and what we have on this island, and it's just like we should not be taking it for granted, So I guess that's, and travel more. Go travel and see the world.
Go travel.
Yeah. It's not that scary. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Craig. Thank you so much to Craig again for doing that interview. I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed doing that interview, and thank you for sticking around to the end of this one. Big thanks goes out to Ben McConkey for providing the theme music to this podcast. As I mentioned off the top about my audio memoir business, if you're at all interested in recording an audio memoir, there is a link in the show notes, or you can go to myaudiomemoir.com to find out more to have your life story recorded. If you're listening to this in the summertime, I hope you are enjoying your summer. Have a good one. Get in the ocean if you get a chance to. It's beautiful out there. And until next time.